Here we are at the school garden, and as you can see, it's raining out right now. And in the Pacific Northwest, we don't have a whole lot of snow, but we do have this crazy rain, and it gets even harder than this. And so what we're talking about today is mulching, and you can see how some of the soil here is bare, has a little bit of mulch, and what would happen is all of the nutrients and microbes and all the good stuff that feed the plants in the soil would get washed away all winter long. And so by applying the mulch, you are protecting those organisms, the nutrients that feed the plants, so that we have either continuous growth throughout the winter when it warms up and in the spring, and also that the soil is ready and in good shape for when we want to do our spring plantings. So here's Connie again. We're at the school garden, and we are going to be talking about mulching your garden beds for the winter.
Hi. One of the things that's really important about wintering over your garden is sometimes completely different than you might have learned in the past from your folks or your grandparents. But as we find out more and more about the soil, it just makes sense that things are going to evolve. And so, you know, in my mom's day, what she would have done is she would have cleaned everything off this soil, and, you know, all the weeds and all this debris, and she would have cleaned everything off the soil and left it bare all winter long. And what we've discovered is that if you do that, you lose a lot of topsoil. The rain and the freezing and thawing and all that sort of thing, it just breaks apart the soil, and then a lot of it washes away. And here on the coast, you really have to spend a lot of time building soil. And so to allow some of it to wash away seems really, really counterproductive. And, you know, there's an illustration of this that shows how if a soil is covered with anything at all, there's going to be less runoff. The very best thing is to have plants growing in it. Even if it's weeds, it's better than having no plants at all. But around here, the weeds can be so tenacious that probably a better solution is to mulch. And so you can see that there's some mulch here already. This looks like it was some sort of straw, and that's a really good mulch. The other thing that's a good mulch is just pulling up these weeds on a nice sunny day like today. And if you expose them to the sun, they're just going to dry up anyway. And so they add to the organic matter. There's no need to have to haul them all the way to the compost pile to do that. So that's another sort of thing that you can use for mulch, is just the weeds that are right here in place, because oftentimes they have the nutrients that your soil needs. That's why they're growing there. So this garden is done just absolutely amazing. I cannot believe, I was here at the start of this garden and saw how little soil there actually was here. And just by the addition of these wood chips and everything, this soil has maintained a lot of moisture, and this garden just looks absolutely beautiful. And it just is quite amazing what just the addition of any kind of organic mulch will do for a garden. So saying that, we went around and got some different things to mulch with. And just to show you, you can use leaves whole if you like. If it's, and this is really good for your ornamental beds as well. If you don't like the look of these, which, you know, some people just don't, what you can do is you can run over them with a lawnmower, or you can just kind of crunch them up a bunch, or, you know, there's a bunch of things that you can do to kind of just make them break down faster. But in our case, we really don't want them to break down faster. We want them to kind of survive all winter long and protect remember, you're protecting the microbes, you're protecting the worms, you're actually protecting your plant's roots too. Because, you know, we don't get many freezes here on the coast, but when we get one, the soil is so wet that when it freezes, water expands, and so it just pushes the plants like with a frost heave right out of the ground, and sometimes it damages roots. The other thing is when this dark soil is exposed, what happens is that on a day in the middle of winter, those beautiful days that we love so much where sun is shining like this and the soil really heats up when it's this dark. And so if it heats up, anything like this cabbage or these leeks or lettuce or whatever you're mulching around, whatever's in your garden, is going to come out of dormancy because the soil is going to heat up so much. The black absorbs so much heat. And it sounds like a good thing, but it's usually not, because our clearest days usually correspond to our coldest nights in the winter. And so what will happen is that these plants will take up all this water and they'll be really, really happy and think it's spring. And then at the night, they've got all this water in their cells, and at night, if the temperature drops, the water freezes. And so this also acts as an insulation to keep plants dormant until it's warm enough for them to come out of dormancy safely. And so that's another reason that it's a really good idea to mulch, whether it's your ornamentals or it's your vegetable garden. It's still a really good idea to mulch. And with your ornamentals, I mean, you've paid a lot of money for them usually, and it's not usually the cold that will kill them here, but what it is them coming out of dormancy and then getting frozen at night. So there's lots of different alternatives for mulch. It's really better if you can get your mulch, like commonly people here, you hear, oh, use straw or hay. But nowadays what happens is that so much of it is sprayed that you have to be really careful of your sources of your hay or your straw. Now, straw is generally a little bit better than hay because, as you can see, this does have some weed seed in it, flower heads and weed seed. So if you see them, pull them out. But generally, the best solution to weeds anyway is just more mulch. So if you put this down, and that's a really good reason to mulch as well, is if you put this down and there's some weeds that come up, the best solution is to put more mulch on top of it. And eventually what will happen is those weeds will be so short of light, they'll struggle towards the light, and they'll get weaker and weaker and weaker. And even if they don't completely die, they're really easy to pull out. I have decided that I just mulch over the top of my buttercups, and they get so weak I can pull them out with tweezers rather than a big heavy gardening tool. So Ruth Stout was the first person who really popularized this mulch, and her name of her book is A Green Thumb Without an Aching Back. And that's what she did, is she never dug her garden. She just mulched, and then in the spring you can just push the mulch aside a bit and plant right into it. So you don't have to remove the mulch in the spring. This is a one-way street. You can just push it aside. The other thing you can mulch with, and this mulch is exceptionally good for a few different plants. Things like brassicas really like seaweed, and this is some of that sea grass. There's different kinds of seaweed in here, and any kind of seaweed will do. It's not important which seaweed you actually use for this. You do not have to wash your seaweed. You can just put it straight on your garden. I've never had trouble with anything that I've mulched with seaweed. Now, cabbage is one of those things that really likes seaweed. And so we're going to put some seaweed around this. And one of the things seaweed does is seaweeds are full of silica. And so what that does is it feeds the plant the silica as it breaks down. And that creates really strong cell walls. And that's what you want to resist disease, to resist insect attack. And actually, seaweed is a really good mulch around your fruit trees as well. because the fruit trees are prone to fungal diseases in this climate, and the seaweed toughens the cells so that the fungal diseases can't invade so easily. So that's a really good seaweed for that. Also, anything that is being attacked by the slugs, the seaweed kind of discourages them, not completely, but I have rarely seen slugs crawl over seaweed to get to something. So that's also another really, really good use for seaweed.
You can see here where we mulched the other day how well protected that soil looks with the leaves and the straw and that seaweed there. So these rains will not affect that soil that's underneath that mulch.